Welcome to today's Explainer. Faith can sometimes feel, well, a little chaotic, right? Like a giant puzzle with pieces scattered everywhere. But today, we're going to change that. We are taking that chaos and building a rock-solid, beautifully organized foundation using the four main branches of theology. Think of this as your ultimate architectural blueprint for what you believe and why you believe it.
Let's jump right in, because the source material hits us with a wild, but honestly spot-on analogy. Picture this. You run to the supermarket, cruise down the aisles, toss some bread and fruit in your cart, pay, and bolt. You just take what you need, right? Well, a lot of folks are treating church the exact same way. It's basically consumer Christianity. People pick the worship songs they vibe with, take the parts of the sermon that make them feel warm and fuzzy, and just leave the rest behind.
And that totally nails the difference between a consumer and a true worshiper. A consumer walks out of a service grumbling, right? Like, ugh, the preacher was off today, the music was too old, I just didn't get anything out of it. But here's the profound shift our source highlights. In Portuguese, the word for a worship service is culto, and fundamentally, that means bringing an offering to God. So, if a service feels empty, it might actually just be a reflection of what we failed to bring to the table. A worshiper knows they aren't there to take, they're there to give.
So, to cure this whole supermarket mindset, we really need a roadmap. Here's our agenda for today: the faith supermarket, historical theology, dogmatic theology, biblical theology, systematic theology, and finally, the knowledge challenge.
All right, let's dive into our first pillar, historical theology, and our journey as a church.
Now, church history is incredibly broad. Theologian Alderi Souza de Matos points out it's way more than just memorizing old dates. It's the story of mission spreading across the globe. It's liturgy. And hey, for anyone who thinks structured worship stifles the Spirit, our source reminds us that the Holy Spirit is actually highly organized. It even covers the nitty-gritty of church administration. Because yes, the church is a living organism, but it's also a human institution. The lights don't stay on by a miracle, guys. Somebody's got to pay the electric and water bills. Structure is totally biblical.
This branch of theology also digs into how the church interacts with society and the state. Our source brings up a fascinating case study using recent political and economic turbulence in Brazil. Amidst the protests and instability, a huge question pops up. Should the church be out on the streets with protest signs, or should it prioritize gathering to pray? The source notes that while citizens absolutely have a right to protest, historically and theologically speaking, a unified church praying on its knees has actually held way more power than physical protests. It's a prime example of how our theology directly dictates our civic posture in real time.
Moving right along to pillar number 2, dogmatic theology, which is really all about our identity.
I know, the word dogma can sound super intimidating, maybe even a bit negative these days, but the source argues we actually need to reclaim it as a survival tool. See, dogmatic theology doesn't look directly at the ancient biblical texts. Instead, it studies the official written creeds and confessions of a specific church. Pastor Ezequiel Suarez makes a great point here. Every single denomination desperately needs a clear printed document that spells out its essential pillars. Because if you don't have a written stance on foundational things like the Trinity or salvation, you literally can't even start doing dogmatic theology.
Scholar Mark Knoll hits the nail on the head regarding why these written creeds are so crucial. Basically, a confession of faith is a flag planted firmly in the ground. It gives a local community its distinct identity. A lot of churches today are terrified of taking a hard stance because they just want to please everybody. But when you refuse to define what you believe, you just blend right in with the surrounding secular culture. Same music, same behaviors, sometimes even the same corruption. A creed boldly steps up and says, this is exactly who we are, and this is how we're different.
So here's the kicker. Without that solid foundational knowledge, you are totally defenseless. The source points out how awkward and honestly embarrassing it is when believers get questioned by groups like Mormons or Jehovah's Witnesses, and they literally freeze up. They have zero arguments because they don't even know their own fundamental doctrines. Knowing your church's dogma is what arms you with the truth.
All right, let's pivot to our third branch, biblical theology, which brings us back to the source. Now, biblical theology is rigorous. According to Russell Norman Champlin, the ultimate goal here is to strip away all your local, regional, and denominational biases. You have to look at the text exactly as it is. Remember, the Bible wasn't just written by one guy on a Tuesday afternoon. It was penned by around 40 different authors over centuries. So the mission is to discover the true original intent of those authors and to trace how truth unfolds across the books. And you have to do this even if what you find challenges or totally contradicts your church's traditional teachings.
But to actually pull this off, the source drops a massive warning against what it calls reading for statistical control. You know the type, people who love to brag, "Oh, I've read the Bible 15 times, cover to cover again this year," just so they can check a box. But look, if you read it 15 times and still have no clue what it actually means, what was the point? Biblical theology demands patience. It demands that we stop treating reading like a competitive sport and start reading for deep, actual transformation.
And finally, we arrive at our fourth branch, systematic theology, which acts as our map. Theologians Franklin Ferreira and Alan Myatt describe systematic theology as, well, building a system. Instead of studying books one by one, you gather every single thing the entire Bible says about one specific topic and you organize it logically. Why is this a game changer? Because without it, preaching gets incredibly chaotic. We've all sat through sermons that start in Genesis, jump over to the prophets, bounce into Revelation, and 40 minutes later, you are sitting there wondering what on earth the message was actually about. Systematic theology keeps things laser-focused. It shows us that God is organized, and our learning should absolutely be organized too.
It takes these massive, overwhelming concepts and beautifully categorizes them into specialized fields. Check this out. We've got theology proper, which is just the study of God himself. Hamartiology is the study of sin, where it came from and what it does. Soteriology dives into salvation and grace. Paracletology focuses on the Holy Spirit. Eschatology looks at the end times. Angelology, angels, obviously. Anthropology studies humanity's origins. Christology is all about Jesus Christ, and bibliology looks at the Bible's own origins. By slicing theology up into these precise categories, we can actually wrap our heads around these massive subjects without getting lost.
Which brings us to the final part of today's explainer, the knowledge challenge, and building your foundation.
So you've got the blueprint now. You can clearly see how historical, dogmatic, biblical, and systematic theology all work together to build something unbreakable. The crucial question our source leaves us with today is this: how are you going to build your foundation? Are you going to keep strolling down the aisles like a consumer, just picking out whatever is easy and makes you feel good? Or will you use these incredible tools to actually seek the truth? The blueprint is literally in your hands right now. So what are you going to build?